The folding chair creaked softly beneath Major Darius Holt as he settled into the last row of the Jefferson High Gymnasium. He wore his best pressed shirt, Marine Corps ring glinting faintly on his weathered hand. The air buzzed with nervous energy, families laughing, banners swaying from the rafters, names echoing off cinderblock walls. But Darius was still, always had been, calm like the eye of a storm. He wasn't here for noise. He was here for his son. Miles Holt was graduating, third in his class, honor cords draped neatly over his shoulders. Darius had watched that boy grind through books, ball practice, and heartbreak, never asking for attention, just like his old man. But not everyone in the room carried that quiet pride. As the national anthem faded, two private security guards flanked the aisle. They moved with authority, their suits stiff, their gaze sweeping the rows. One pointed, the other nodded. Then they started walking, straight toward Darius. He didn't move, didn't blink. Just sat with his hands folded over his knee, eyes on the stage. But inside, the Marine in him stood tall. "Sir," one guard said flatly, "I'm going to need you to come with us." Darius slowly turned. "Am I under arrest?" "No, sir. It's just, we've had a complaint about you. Someone said you were making guests uncomfortable." From 2 rows over, a woman glanced away guiltily. Darius didn't know her, didn't need to. "I've said nothing. I've moved for no one," he said calmly. "I'm here for my son." The second guard shifted, hand hovering just above his belt. The tension in the gym rose like the tide. No one dared speak, but eyes began to turn. Then, a sound, a soft scrape of a chair leg. One man stood near the middle section. Broad shoulders, silver buzz cut, dark suit. He didn't say a word, just stared down the guards. Then another stood, and another. Within seconds, 6 men stood in silent unison, scattered among the crowd, like chess pieces already in place. They didn't wear medals, but anyone who'd served could see it in their posture. SEALs. The lead guard's mouth opened, then closed again. His partner's hand drifted back down. Something in the air shifted, thick, electric, undeniable, like a storm that decided not to break. Darius still hadn't moved. "You've got 2 choices," the first man said softly, stepping closer to the guards. His name was Beckett Quinn, and once upon a time, he and Darius had dragged each other through the Afghan dust. "Walk away," Beckett continued, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "Or find out what it means to be remembered for the wrong reason." The guards faltered. The principal appeared, whispering something sharp in their ears. They turned. They walked. Fast. And the gym fell silent, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Darius let out his own breath slowly. Miles, standing with his class, had seen it all. He was next in line to walk the stage. Miles Holt stood frozen just off stage, diploma in hand, his name freshly called, echoing through the gym speakers. But the applause had died. A moment earlier, the gym had been electric. Now it was quiet, reverent. All eyes weren't on the podium anymore. They were on the back row, on his father. Darius Holt hadn't moved an inch, but he didn't need to. The presence of those 6 SEALs standing tall around him told the whole story. They didn't make speeches. They didn't raise voices. They just stood. And somehow, that silence roared louder than anything Miles had ever heard. The principal cleared her throat awkwardly and tried to regain control. "Let's continue," she said with forced cheer. "Miles Holt, graduating with high honors." But the audience wasn't ready to move on. Someone started clapping, then another. Then the sound swelled like a tide. This wasn't polite applause. It was thunderous, raw, real, the kind that made your ribs shake. Miles stepped forward, head held high. He didn't rush. Every step down that stage felt deliberate, like a march, like honor in motion. Teachers who doubted him stood now. Classmates who never knew what he carried clapped like they finally saw it. As he walked across the gym floor, he locked eyes with his dad. And for a second, it felt like time folded in half. Like that little boy who once ran into his father's arms after boot camp was now walking straight into his legacy. Miles stopped in front of him. Darius stood, father and son. No medals, no ceremony. Just a look between two men who understood what it took to get here. Then something unexpected happened. One of the SEALs, Beckett, stepped forward, hand outstretched. "Your father saved lives most people will never know about," he said to Miles, voice firm but proud. Today he stood alone again, until we reminded the room. He never really stands alone. He shook Miles's hand. The others followed, one by one, each laying a hand on the young graduate's shoulder, offering not just congratulations, but recognition for the boy he was, for the man he'd become. Darius didn't say much on the way out. He never did. But as they reached the parking lot, Miles turned to him. "You okay, Dad?" Darius looked at his son, his voice low, steady. "I've been to war, son, fought in deserts, lost brothers. But today," he paused, "today I saw more courage in a gym full of strangers than I have seen in years." They got in the car and drove off. Behind them, 6 men faded back into the crowd, like ghosts, like guardians. And the world kept turning. But that gym would never forget what it witnessed. That night, Darius sat on the edge of his bed, the room dim, lit only by the soft glow of a lamp. The house was quiet. Miles had gone out to celebrate with friends, but Darius wasn't thinking about the graduation party. He was still back in that gym, hearing the silence, feeling it. He reached under his bed and pulled out an old wooden box, the kind that smelled of oil and time. Inside were fragments of a life most people would never understand. Medals tarnished by sand, a photo of his SEAL unit, all smiling in a place that had taken too many smiles, and a folded American flag, edges worn from being held too many nights when sleep didn't come easy. He picked up a photo, young Darius with his brothers in arms, Beckett, Vance, Mendez, Tay, Russo, and Logan. 6 men who had each saved his life more than once. 6 men who were there today, standing behind him when the world tried to forget who he was. A knock broke the silence. He opened the door to find his neighbor, Mrs. Winslow, a white woman in her 60s who'd lived next door for years. She clutched a casserole and looked at him with damp eyes. "I saw what happened today," she said softly, "and I just wanted to say thank you for what you've done, for all of us, and for raising a boy like Miles." Darius took the dish, momentarily unsure how to respond. "Thank you, ma'am," he finally said. She gave him a gentle nod. "My husband served in Vietnam. Said men like you don't get the thanks you deserve. I just wanted you to hear it at least once." He watched her walk away, her back a little straighter than usual. Something about today had shifted more than just opinions. It had shifted hearts. Later that night, Miles returned home. The joy of the day was still on his face, but he carried something else now, awareness. He sat across from his father at the kitchen table, both of them quiet for a moment. "Dad," he finally said, "when they told you to leave, what were you thinking?" Darius looked at his son, eyes steady. "I was thinking," he said, "that if I walked out, I'd be teaching you it's okay to shrink in the face of ignorance, and I won't ever do that." Miles swallowed, emotion catching in his throat. "I didn't know they were going to show up like that." "I did," Darius said, half smiling. Miles looked confused. "I sent them a message the night before," Darius continued. "Told them I might need backup. Didn't tell them why. Didn't need to. They didn't ask questions. That's the kind of men they are." "And you?" Miles asked. Darius stood, walked to the window, and looked out into the night. "I'm a Marine, son. We don't ask for permission to stand tall. We just do." And for the first time in his life, Miles truly understood what that meant. The next morning, the headlines had already begun circulating online. "Decorated Marine asked to leave son's graduation?" Then 6 Navy SEALs stood with him. Photos and cell phone videos taken by stunned parents and students had gone viral overnight. One image in particular, Darius standing silently, hands behind his back, flanked by 6 towering men in dress blues, became a symbol of strength, unity, and quiet resistance. But while the world reacted with hashtags and news segments, Darius stayed silent. He didn't need applause. His uniform wasn't for attention. It was for truth. Still, the phone rang nonstop. Old commanders, reporters, even the local mayor. But Darius ignored most of them. His focus was Miles. That afternoon, they sat on the back porch. The sun hung low, painting the sky orange and gold. "Are you mad it happened?" Miles asked quietly. Darius looked at him. "Mad? Number disappointed? Yeah, but not surprised. I've lived enough to know some people see the uniform but not the man. Others see the skin but not the sacrifice." Miles sat back, taking that in. "I feel like I should have said something. I just froze." "You didn't need to speak," Darius said. "Your presence was enough. And when those 6 stood with me, you saw it. Sometimes the loudest messages come in silence." Miles nodded slowly. "They used to call me the colonel's kid in school. I didn't even know what half of that meant until now." Darius chuckled, the sound low and weathered. "They called me worse growing up. But titles don't make a man. Actions do inside." Darius's phone buzzed again. This time, he checked the message. It was from Commander Beckett. Just one sentence. "Thought you'd like to know. 3 guards at the ceremony were removed. The school board issued an apology." Darius stared at the message for a long time. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just let out a long breath. One he hadn't realized he'd been holding since that moment in the gym. Justice didn't always come with sirens or spotlights. Sometimes it came in ripples. Later that evening, a box arrived at their doorstep. No return address. Inside was a shadow box, a framed American flag, a photo of Darius and his SEAL brothers, and a brass plate that read, "For the Marine who stood alone, until he didn't." Tears welled in Darius's eyes, uninvited but welcome. Miles stood beside him, hand on his father's shoulder. "Dad," he said, voice steady, "I'm proud of you, not just for what you did overseas, but for how you stood here, for me." Darius turned to him, his voice a whisper. "I didn't just stand for you, son. I stood so that one day you'll never have to." Days passed. The buzz around the graduation incident began to fade from the headlines. But for the Draytons, its impact lingered like a storm after the calm. Life moved on, but something had shifted, not just in public perception, but deep within their home, their hearts. On a quiet Saturday morning, Darius stood alone in the garage. He was polishing his metals, something he hadn't done in years, not for vanity, not for nostalgia, but because for the first time in a long while, he understood what they truly meant. Not the wars, not the ranks, but the burden and honor of standing for something bigger than himself. Behind him, Miles entered silently, holding a worn photograph. It was of Darius in his younger days in desert camo, standing shoulder to shoulder with his SEAL team, arms slung over each other's backs, faces smeared with sand and sweat, but proud. "You never showed me this one before," Miles said softly. Darius looked up, then smiled. "That was Kandahar. We just pulled off a mission the brass said was suicide. But none of us flinched, because we knew we had each other's backs." Miles ran a finger over the photo. "Like they did at my graduation." Darius nodded, emotion rising in his chest. "Those men, they didn't come because I asked. They came because they knew what was right. We weren't just soldiers, we were brothers. And sometimes that brotherhood goes beyond the battlefield." He paused. "You know, I used to worry that all my service, years overseas, everything I missed with you, it wouldn't mean anything once I got home. That the country I fought for might forget the man behind the uniform." Miles's voice cracked. "But they didn't." "No," Darius said, "because you remembered, because they remembered, and because I finally realized something." He stepped closer and placed a firm hand on Miles's shoulder. "All these years, I thought I was fighting to protect you from war, but maybe I was fighting to show you how to stand, with courage, with dignity, even when the world tells you to sit down." Tears slipped down Miles's cheek. He didn't wipe them away. "I'll never forget how you stood, Dad. I'll never forget that moment. It taught me more than any classroom ever could." Outside, the mail truck pulled up. The mailbox clinked shut, and Miles jogged out to check it. He returned with a thick envelope marked with the seal of a military academy. Darius raised an eyebrow. "You applying to West Point?" Miles smirked. "Not quite." He opened the envelope and pulled out a letterhead from Howard University's ROTC program. "I got accepted," he said. "I start in the fall." Darius stared at his son for a long time. Pride, relief, and emotion collided in his chest. "You're sure about this?" Miles nodded. "I want to serve, not just because of what happened, but because I want to walk the same path, with my own boots." Darius pulled him into a firm embrace. No words, just the quiet strength of a father who had given his all, now watching the next generation pick up the mantle. That evening, the two stood outside, the sky streaked with stars. Darius lit a small fire pit, the flames crackling softly. "You know," Darius said, gazing at the sky, "some people think strength is about being the loudest in the room. But real strength, it's being able to stand, even when you're standing alone." Miles looked over at him. "You weren't alone, Dad. Not that day. Not ever." They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the fire and the wind. The past had tried to quiet Darius Drayton, tried to make him small. But that day at the graduation, 6 men had turned a silent stand into a thunderous roar that echoed far beyond those gymnasium walls. And now that echo lived on, in his son.